Welcome to the Widowed Parent Podcast with your host, Jenny Lisk.
Hey everyone, it's Jenny Lisk, and this is episode 26 of the Widowed Parent Podcast. I had such a great discussion with Fran Solomon for this episode. Fran is the founder of healgrief.org, which runs Actively Moving Forward, a grief support program for college students with chapters on many campuses. Fran and I talked all about grief as it relates to college students, including the prevalence of grief as an issue for people in this age group, why grieving college students are particularly vulnerable, the purpose of Actively Moving Forward, which is to support and empower grieving college students and young adults to actively move forward through their journey with grief, the work they are doing on bereavement leave policies for students and the Grief-Sensitive Campus Initiative, resources they have for college students, including a closed Facebook group, webinars, and a young adult grief retreat, the peer-based model that their college chapters use, how to find out if your campus has a chapter and the support they provide for starting new chapters, some examples of the kindness in action projects that their chapters do in celebration and in memory of loved ones, and some of healgrief.org's other offerings, such as a virtual candle lighting and the virtual Before I Die wall. I hope you enjoy my discussion with Fran Solomon. My guest today is Fran Solomon, the founder of healgrief.org and Actively Moving Forward, and Fran is joining us from her home office in Los Angeles, California. Fran, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be part of your show.
Yeah, well, I'm really glad to be talking with you today, and to be talking specifically about grieving college students and how your organization supports them. And, I think this is really important. I've had some requests for more resources and discussion around the needs of college-age people. And, some of us with high schoolers will be there before we know it as well. So this is going to be really great talking with you today. And I'd like to ask you to start, if you would please, actually, by reading a quote from one of your participants. And this is from Katie at Georgetown.
Yes, Georgetown University. And she wrote in and said, "I did not really process the grief from my father's death until I went to college and was faced with a new environment filled with people who didn't know anything about me. The AMF support group was my safe haven, my place of unspoken understanding when there were no words, my strength when things felt unhinged, and through service projects, a place to direct my energy and help others in the same way."
Wow, that's great. So this is a really important topic. So let's start out with some basics. How many college students today are affected by the loss of someone close to them?
So Jenny, the numbers are really startling. Independent research shows that 1 in every 3 young adult is grieving a death of a loved one.
1 in 3?
1 in 3. And if you think about it, that's a startling number. So just to give you a little statistical information, studies show that it's 1 in 20 who are grieving a death as a child and adolescent. By the time they jump into their 18 to 25-year-old demographic, it is 1 in 3 within 1 year of a loved one's death. By the time year 2 rolls around, that number jumps up to 48%. So if you think about it, almost half of young adults are grieving a loved one's death.
Wow. And just to be clear, does that include like siblings and maybe close friends as well?
A loved one's death could be a friend, could be someone who a person has grown up with all their lives and is really the surrogate sibling. Mm-hmm. So it could be a friend, a loved one. We don't qualify that relationship.
Right. Okay. And clearly some percentage of that would be people who lost a parent.
Clearly, yes.
Yeah.
We've actually had a great deal of inquiry from universities asking how to support their students, because a decade ago, these students were coming in asking for time off to go home and grieve and be with their family when a grandparent died. Now they're coming in because their parent has died.
Wow.
And if you think about it, with the demographics of families, I use my own family as an example. My daughter is 17, my husband is in his 70s. Just by mere math, families are getting older.
Sure, sure. So you bring up an interesting point about, I mean, what typically happens at college? Let's say a student is away at college and their parent dies, maybe mid-semester sometime. What typically happens in those cases? Does the student get time off? That seems like it would be awfully difficult to handle.
It is terribly difficult, and we are at AMF addressing that issue head on. So we hear from our students, and that's how we develop our programs. Typically what will happen is a student will get notification of a death, and they will then have to go in and negotiate their leave of absence with every one of their professors. And some professors, not understanding grief and the process of it, will say the funeral is on Saturday, you can turn the paper in on Sunday. On Friday. Or the funeral's on Saturday, you can be here to take the exam on Monday. Well, they're actually setting up their student for failure. So what we are doing is we have created a grief-sensitive campus initiative where we are speaking with various universities about creating not only a bereavement leave policy for students, but also a grief-sensitive campus initiative. And it's mind-boggling to me that we have only identified 40 universities throughout the United States that actually have a student bereavement leave policy in existence. And some of those were a result of our AMFers, our students. So they'll have a bereavement leave policy for staff or faculty, but when a student is all of a sudden burdened with having to deal with a death of a loved one, really they're at the mercy of their professors, and each one of them has a very different philosophy. Not to mention the logistical burden of negotiating with each of those professors independently. It really stunts their journey, the beginning of their journey to getting home and being with their family and their loved ones. Some people have to travel halfway around the world. Yeah, sure. Okay, so why are grieving college students then particularly vulnerable? Grieving college students, I would say, are particularly vulnerable because they are usually, for the first time in their lives, away from their network of support that they've known all their lives. Their family and friends are no longer there to support them. They are burdened with academic pressures. They lack empathy from their peers. And many campuses don't offer specific grief support on their universities. So what tends to happen is these students, neither child nor adult in that developmental stage, never been given a manual. If you think about it, they're at a point in time in their life where socially they're supposed to be really developing their relationships, but instead they're isolating themselves. Where they're supposed to be excelling in areas of interest, but they can't compete because they're grieving. They become very isolated in themselves because they don't get the empathy and the support at college and with their peers. That totally makes sense. So then it seems like, are they at risk then of developing different mental health struggles, be it anxiety, depression, other things? Is there an increased risk then of those? Absolutely. So let's look at what the risks are. There's a physical risk, which is a lack of energy. Academic, which is the inability to focus. There's social risk, feeling of isolation. Developmentally, a sense of being stuck or inability to move forward. And emotionally, all those things can lead to depression and depressive behaviors. Yeah. No, that makes sense. And many of them drop out. I mean, this is a time in their lives when we find that the life path that they sought to pursue is often changed forever. The trajectory of their life is often changed forever at this very crucial time. And we have many students and young adults that drop out or take a year off and don't quite get back into the swing of things.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I see what you mean. And before, because I want to ask you next about what your organization is doing, but something you said reminded me. You mentioned that there weren't a whole lot of grief support resources at colleges. What about mental health resources generally? Do colleges generally do a good job, or is it hit and miss of supporting students' mental health?
I would say in general, they're doing a much better job at it. I think mental health issues have really come to the forefront and they're addressing it. Mm-hmm. The challenge with grief is it's really not, in our opinion, a mental health issue. Someone grieving is not dealing with a mental health problem.
Okay.
That it can lead to issues of mental health and substance abuse and addiction. But we see grief as a natural response to a loved one's death. Mm-hmm.
And so it's maybe if they somehow don't get the support they need, or if something goes wrong in the process, then they may end up with a mental health challenge,
correct,
anxiety or something else.
Correct.
Gotcha.
Correct.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so your organization, so you founded healgrief.org, and Heal Grief has a program called Actively Moving Forward, and that serves grieving college students. So first of all, what is Actively Moving Forward?
So Actively Moving Forward is a response to the student need, where we connect, support, and empower these grieving young adults to actively move forward through their journey with grief. They do so in many different ways, and I just want to give a shout out and a credit. I am not the founder of the program Actively Move Forward. We adopted it from a young man, David Fashionbaum, who started the program when his mother was diagnosed with a terminal cancer. He was a college student. She had died while he was a college student, and he struggled. And he found comfort in seeking others that were going through a grieving process such as he. Okay. We had one student from Duke University, and she was so eloquent. She said, I can be in a cafeteria with hundreds of other kids, and they could be talking about tragedies, mudslides, and fires, and all these traumatic events. But as soon as you mention someone died, nobody knows what to say.
Ah, interesting. So the generic, not generic, but the mudslide or the tornado seems a little more maybe abstract or distant.
Tell me more. Oh my God, tell me more.
Yeah.
When someone says someone died, nobody knows how to react. And too often we hear that a typical response would be, oh, well, there's a party Friday night. Do you want to join us? Trying to comfort, I guess, or change the subject to a happier subject. I mean, yeah. I laugh when people say, don't talk about the person that died, as if they're going to forget that their loved one is no longer with them.
Right. Yeah. I forgot that he died. Okay. Yeah. Okay. No, that makes sense. And how long has Actively Moving Forward been around?
Actively Moving Forward has been around, I want to say, over a decade.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. And we have really embraced it with Heal Grief, and are evolving it. And again, that Grief Sensitive Campus initiative that we are rolling out, we're doing a lot of great things to help support this demographic. It's a silent epidemic. I mean, It is probably the last, if not close to the last, social issue yet to be addressed for this demographic on college campuses.
Huh. Yeah, interesting. Okay, so college campuses. So how do you have chapters on campuses then, or how does this program function?
So generally, a student will be Googling through the search engines college grief support, or grief support for a college student, or young adult grief support. Fortunately, they'll find us, And through that process, they'll create a submission. And we have a program director, Kiri Meyer, who is amazing. She was an AMFer, and that's how she came to AMF, and she is our director of programming. And she will help students that are inquiring about chapters, either connecting them to chapters or helping them if they want to develop a chapter on their campus, and at the least be able to give them other supportive services that they may not be aware of should we not have it.
Gotcha. Okay, so and how many approximately chapters are there? How many campuses have chapters already?
We have currently, I want to say, about 50 or 60 chapters going, and we're looking to expand that into community chapters as well, because we understand, even though the studies were done on college campuses that confirm the 1 in 3, that it's probably and very practically not related to just college students, that it is the demographics at large.
Yeah, okay. And are all these chapters based in the U.S.? Do you have any in any other countries?
At this particular moment, we're all U.S.-based. We don't feel that it is something that should only be a U.S. Solution. There are college students around the world, and they need to be supported. So we hope that we create the model for future support in other worlds.
So I happen to have a lot of listeners in the UK and in Canada. So if any of them are listening and have kids in college, are you open to?
Absolutely open to it. Absolutely. There are no boundaries there.
And so how can somebody find out if they have a chapter at their school already?
They can inquire with us. We very thoughtfully do not list our chapters on our website for 2 reasons. One, it's a constant chameleon. Depending upon chapter leaders and students that are involved in that particular chapter. And 2, and the more important point, we didn't want a young adult seeking help going to our website and saying, oh, they don't have a chapter at my school, and feeling defeated. We want them to submit the inquiry, and this way, as I had mentioned, if we don't have a chapter and they're not looking to lead a chapter, we can still get them the support they need.
Okay. Well, okay, so that's an interesting question. If they just don't feel they can tackle starting a chapter at their school, and there's not one, then what kinds of support or resources do you guys have available for them?
We have a AMF is a national network. And we have a closed Facebook group where young adults can connect with other young adults, regardless of what their geography is, and have conversations, strike up questions. We have webinars that we provide for our young adults to connect. We have a camp, a young adult grief retreat called Jaeger, in partnership with Experience Camp, where young adults, completely free of charge, we only ask them to pay for their travel, can sign up and interact with others going through similar journeys. And some of the journeys are not necessarily very recent. A lot of our young adults are of the opinion that they're still working through their grief journey with life cycle events that become triggers. And they can go through those journeys with other people that understand. So it's really connections. It's all about the connections and connecting to others that get it.
Yeah, no, that's great. I love that. And that's so important. And if somebody contacts you and there's not a chapter at their school and they say, I want to take this on. I'm going to do this at my school. What kind of help do you provide them, or resources, tools, whatnot, in getting started for a new chapter?
We hold their hand through the whole process. We have a toolkit. We have several toolkits where Kiri, our director of program, will literally walk them through the process, strategize with them. We will connect them with other young adults that have also started chapters, so they don't feel alone in that journey. And once students actually put the word out, they usually find others that want to connect too. I mean, if you think about it, 1 in 3.
Yeah. I read something, maybe it was on your website, of quotes from participants who said, gosh, I didn't even know that the student who lived down the hall from me in the dorm also had lost their mother, their father, whatnot, until maybe they got this chapter started and met them through the course of that. It just hadn't come up, I guess, somehow in everyday life.
Yeah, again, it's one of those things that people don't talk about because others don't know how to respond.
Yeah, exactly.
So we're trying to normalize grief and say that it is a normal response. There is nothing wrong with you. It's not something you're supposed to get over. Right. The old cliche. We're also dismissing the notion that we get a lot of pushback. Oh, well, we offer a lot of resiliency programs. Well, we here at Heal Grief really dismiss the notion of resilience. Just in the word itself implies things bounce back to the way they were. When a loved one dies, things will never be the way they were. That doesn't mean that you're grieving every day, but it does mean that life is changed forever. And so we look at post-traumatic growth as part of our model and use resilience as a component of that growth. Yeah.
So, okay, I'm glad you brought up post-traumatic growth. I guess what have you found are there any key elements that might, I don't know, help foster that, or how do you try to encourage or enable or facilitate, or I'm not sure what the right word is, but how do you try to promote that in your programs or in your work?
Really emphasizing that the expectation of things going back to the way they were will not be. There needs to be an acceptance. And in that acceptance, we encourage people to talk about their loved one, to talk about the memories, to celebrate their life, to make it all okay and not stifle the process of grief. And moving forward with understanding that the holidays will have an empty chair. And how do you get through that? And what do you need to do for yourself? I would say that is really the beginning of a post-traumatic growth, because once you accept, you can then choose to change and adapt. When there's no acceptance, you're still fighting, looking to go back to that status quo.
Okay, that makes sense. So going back to your chapters for a minute here. So let's say someone says, oh great, there's a chapter on my campus, I'd like to get involved. What should they expect? What does a chapter do day in and day out, or month in and month out? What kinds of, activities or support or programming is offered?
So I'm going to take a step back. So the traditional grief support equation is a room full of individuals that are grieving, that are sharing their experiences, and generally have a facilitator. And we have found that that is a brilliant model for children and adolescents and even adults. It's this 18 to 25-year-old age group that has really matured out of that model and has not gone back to it. So we get quite a bit of inquiry from grief support centers that say, we've tried young adult model, grief support, it doesn't work. What are you doing that makes it successful?
And they're trying the typical, sit around in a circle and talk.
Correct.
Okay.
Our young adults want to be active. First off, they don't have time with today's pressures. They don't have time to plan that one a day, go to a center, sit down, have your feelings, and then disseminate back into their lives. They want to be very proactive. So we encourage our young adults to go hiking, to do a yoga class, to bring a potluck dinner to a location and have that dish be a dish that their loved one enjoyed. So it really creates an invitation to speak about their loved one and to celebrate them. So we are not the traditional facilitated group. We also really encourage our young adults through an initiative called Kindness in Action. So we have one young adult whose mother was a teacher, and she loved books. So she did a book drive and donated books to the local children's hospital. Collectively, as a group, if a student had a parent die of ALS or cancer or whatever it might have been, collectively as a group, they'll do a walk or an awareness campaign. Mm-hmm. So they look to do things in celebration and in memory of their loved one. It's a feel-good way, a very cathartic way of moving forward with the memory of. Yeah. In a very cathartic way.
Right. That's terrific. Yeah, I like to think of that as turning grief into action.
We call it action and kindness.
Yeah, and I think it has a lot of...
in action. Kindness in action.
Right. Yeah, no, that's great. Okay, that's great. I'd love to hear more about maybe other projects that some of your members have done. Maybe we can connect later on. Maybe some of them would like to come on the show here and talk to people.
Yeah, I bet they'd be very excited to do that.
Yeah, that'd be cool. Okay, so, and I think that your groups are peer-led.
Yes.
Is there any, professional facilitator, or, is entirely peer-led at the campus level?
Entirely peer-led. We do require that the leader does have an on-campus advocate.
Okay.
But the advocate is certainly not required, and actually not so much even welcomed in the peer-led, facilitated group. And we do that because we understand that our leaders are also going through their journey. So it's really a connecting them with others. There's no specific program. We offer ideas. And within our webinars of chapter leaders, they cross-pollinate ideas. But we're not looking for our leaders to formally facilitate.
Okay.
We're looking at them as campus connectors to connect with others, support each other. I mean, our kids, our young adults, they're great. We have stories where someone was up all night and just couldn't study and couldn't focus. They were grieving. Well, who are they going to reach out to?
Yeah.
Most other kids won't get it.
Sure.
They had their peer within their group that they contacted and said, I can't stop thinking about my mom. And it's like, okay, let's talk about your mom. That's a healing moment. That's a comfort. That's a support that a facilitator can't provide, or a campus group facilitator can't provide. These are kids connecting with other kids.
Sure. And so it sounds like whoever is I forget what you called it, the
advocate
on campus. Right. So that would be like a faculty member or something. But it sounds like they're not. You wouldn't have to find a mental health person, and wouldn't even have to find somebody who had a loss. Just somebody who's interested in.
Correct. And we don't, Heal Grief nor AMF provides clinical services. We shy away from that. We are connectors. We understand the grieving process. We provide the resources and the toolkit. We are not clinicians.
Sure. No, that makes a lot of sense.
Although Kiri is a licensed clinician, we are not in the practice today of being the clinical person.
Right. Okay. I forgot to ask in the beginning, how did you get involved in this work, and how long have you been involved?
The short story, I was in my mid-30s. My dad died, and I was very practical about his death. I did what I thought I was supposed to do. I grieved for 3 days. I went back to work. I put my grief in a box, put a little bow on it, tucked it away, stuck it on a shelf. Years later, my daughter was born, and that was actually a trigger of my grief. The one thing my dad wanted more than anything in the world was to have a granddaughter. And so that trigger really led me down my own grief journey. And I actually worked with a local grief support agency here in Los Angeles. I volunteered and facilitated in the underserved schools for high school students, and went behind the scenes. And I did this for over a decade, and as people knew of my work, I would get calls from all over. Fran, so-and-so died. What do I say? So-and-so died. The kids are having a problem. What can we do? And Jenny, as an insider, it was mind-boggling how the resources just didn't exist. And that was really the inspiration behind Heal Grief. It initially started as a database, which I'd still like to think is somewhat second to none, of resources throughout the United States for individuals seeking that extra support. And then it became a chameleon of so much more of information about grief, age, and death specific, a place to memorialize a loved one regardless of years gone by, a place to light virtual candles. We have people lighting candles on anniversaries of death and anniversaries of birthdays and writing comments as if they're journaling to their loved one on the site. So it evolved, and it had always been a virtual entity. And with AMF, we embraced it as a program, really touching a niche that very few have had success with or don't yet identify with as a really crucial part of kids that are grieving.
Yeah. So, and I saw on your website the virtual candles. Those were cool. So people can just go on there and just sign up or something, or how do they light a candle?
So anybody can access the site, and there is a wealth of information. For the functionality of the site, one just needs to register. There are no fees. We are not a profit center, as most sites that might seem similar to us are. We are not a profit center. And the only reason we require registration for functionality is it gives us that extra layer of security when someone goes in and wants to post something, just to ensure its authenticity and sincerity.
Sure. And you had a project that looked really cool. I think it's called the Before I Die project. Can you tell us about that a little bit?
Sure. So we have the virtual rights to the Before I Die wall. A woman by the name of Candy Chang was in her grief riding a bicycle and saw a shack. And she is by trade an architect and loves drawing and design. And she was inspired to write, "Before I die, ... I." A few days later, she's riding her bike again, and the shack was covered with chalk, "Before I Die."
Really?
And that was the inspiration to the Before I Die project, where you can find these walls in countries, I think over 700 countries in 70 different languages across the United States. And we often use that on our campus as a project to gain awareness to AMF. And we have the virtual wall on our site, and we use it, and we hope it to be a very thought-provoking process to living in the moment.
So when you say the wall was covered with chalk, what kinds of things are people writing?
Before I die, I want to. Before I die, I want to. People would put their own ending to the preface, "Before I die."
Right. Okay. Before I die, I want to accomplish this or see this or do this.
I want to go to college. I want to fall in love. I want to be part of a mission. I want to, whatever their inspiration was.
Yeah.
It was really neat.
That's really cool. Okay. And then you said you have the virtual rights to that?
Yes. So people can go online, and we have a virtual chalkboard. You can pick your colored chalk. And you can fill in the blank, "Before I die." What is your Before I Die?
Yeah. That's really cool. Okay, I'll have to check that out, and we'll put a link to that in the show notes for sure. And people might want to take a look at that. Maybe even something they want to talk to their kids about, whatever age they might be.
We find that death is still a taboo subject, and it's mind-boggling. It's such a natural process of one's life that it's still a very taboo subject. And we encourage people to talk about their end of life and what their hopes are for their legacy and how they want to be remembered.
Yeah.
Going on a bit of a different tangent, we find so many families break up because someone didn't express their wishes, and they're trying to figure out, well, what did their loved one want? And it really interferes with their journey of grief. Because they're fighting.
Right.
And they're trying to figure it out.
Right. In terms of like settling an estate or something?
Settling an estate, or how someone would want to be remembered, or whether someone would want a funeral. In my household, my kids know that the inside of my coffin is cobalt blue. Anybody coming to pay respects, wear cobalt blue. God willing, after my demise, they're going to see cobalt blue, and they're going to have a smile on their face and say, that's Mom.
Yeah. Yeah. And it sounds like then you're giving them the gift of not having to wonder what you wanted. And not having to perhaps have a debate amongst themselves or something that might make the whole situation even more difficult.
Have the conversation, normalize it. It is a natural progression of life.
Yeah. And it sounds like some of your programs and projects then are aimed at having that discussion in the broader community and raising awareness and that sort of thing as well.
Yes, and being able to have the conversation, not isolating yourselves, not thinking that there's something wrong with you when you're grieving a year or two later and you haven't been resilient. Be kind to yourself.
Yeah.
It's really a whole paradigm shift in the way we perceive grief and understand it.
Yeah, yeah. So along those lines, just to bring it back to college students for a minute, do you have any, like, what are some of your top tips for college students who might be grieving?
Find others that understand. Because although I'm sure many of your friends want to be empathetic, they don't necessarily know how to support you. So find others who do understand. And for those that are not grieving and do want to support you, don't be afraid to let them know how. Because with good intentions, they really do want to be there for you. But sometimes because they don't know how to, relationships can take a quick turn.
Okay. And then how about, how can say the university staff, the professors, best support college students who are grieving?
So we offer education for the educators. It is still unfortunate that the 5 stages of grief are still taught in universities. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross herself admitted that the 5 stages of grief were not for those grieving. They were for end-of-life patients and the stages they go through.
Yeah.
It was very quickly adopted to those that are grieving.
Yeah.
So when someone doesn't meet the stages and they're not in a uniform way, and it's like, when are they going to get over it?
And there's something wrong with them, perhaps, because they're doing grief wrong.
Exactly. When we understand that grief has no manual, it is a very independent journey. It is very specific to individuals, to their loved ones. Sometimes siblings grieve very differently over the same loss. They may have had a very different relationship, or they're just very individual people. One may bottle it up, one may be more expressive. No one's journey is correct or wrong, I should say. Everyone's journey is unique. And we hope to, with education, honor that. And so, yes, we educate the educators. We have a school here in California Moorpark University that reached out to us. The teachers were going to the health school office saying, when are our kids going to get over their grief? And a little backstory, some of their students were survivors of the Las Vegas massacre. Some of the same students were survivors of the borderline bar and grill shooting. And then 2 days later, some of these same families were evicted, or evacuated, I should say, from their homes because of the Woodley fires in Los Angeles. And so it was really a community in grief. And kudos to the faculty there, and really the health office, for identifying that grief really is not something that they're telling their faculty that kids are just going to get over. It's a process. It's a long process. And we were called in to create a walkway of hope, to really initiate more conversation over how these kids were feeling, and the hope that lies ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. We're reaching the end of our time today. This has been so fascinating, and I think this is the first episode that I've done specifically on college age and young adult population. So this is so great. I'm so glad we were able to connect on this today.
Thank you, Jenny. I hope we'll do many more.
Oh, for sure. I have one more question to you before I ask you where people can find you. If you could say one thing to widowed parents, because that's primarily my audience, widowed parents, about supporting their grieving college-age students, what would you say to them?
Don't assume because they are in college that they are actively moving forward without support. And don't be afraid to discuss some struggles that they may be having and tie it into the possibility that they may still be grieving, that they are grieving.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I think that's actually a great place to end. So my guest today is Fran Solomon, who's the founder of healgrief.org and who runs the Actively Moving Forward program, a grief program for college students. So Fran, where can listeners find you if they'd like to learn more about healgrief.org or about Actively Moving Forward?
They can go right to the website, healgrief.org. And on there's tons of resources and links to everything about AMF. They can submit an inquiry. They can certainly forward the link to their college student. Just letting them know that even though they may not need the support, it's there if they're looking for it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, fantastic. Fran, thank you so much for speaking with me today.
Thank you so much. Enjoyed your show.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Fran Solomon as much as I did. You can find show notes and all the links at widowedparentpodcast.com. Look for episode 26. If you haven't yet joined our monthly podcast discussion group, you can give it a try this Sunday. We'll be discussing some of the most recent episodes, including my discussions with Dr. Tina Barrett on Mother's Day and Father's Day, Emily Irwin on mindfulness, and several guests who lost parents at a young age and shared their reflections. Sign up at widowedparentpodcast.com and I'll send you the information you need to join on your computer or phone. Also, if you've been finding the podcast useful and haven't yet left a rating, or better yet, a brief, honest review in iTunes, I'd like to ask you to take just a moment now and do it while you're thinking of it. It really does help tremendously in terms of people finding the show. Do it, please, for our fellow widowed parents who would find the Widowed Parent Podcast helpful. You can do it from your iPhone or from iTunes on your computer, or go to jennylisk.com/apple for the link and simple instructions. Thanks for listening. Until next week, keep smiling.
Thank you for listening to the Widowed Parent Podcast with your host, Jenny Lisk. Connect with us on social media and at widowedparentpodcast.com.